What's up, dude? It's David. Guilty before I start. I did just smoke a bowl. Uh, yeah. So if this comes out a little choppy, it's because that's how I react when I'm on it. But I was gonna do this video before, but couldn't resist. It's like already 12 or 1 o'clock right now. Anyway, for the most part, I have a couple things that I want to talk about the video that the one about 300 milliseconds. Being able to make it your subconscious pretty much predetermining a decision you're about to make. So I took a couple of notes, not a script, just a couple of notes that I kind of want to talk about. I kind of formulated a little bit of an argument, and yeah, I'm not sure if it's valid. I know I took a logic class, but I was a little too lazy to check the validity. I was more concerned about the content, and I guess I'll adjust this with the correct wording in order for it to be valid, but I think it stands as sound unless, well, this is why there's a discussion to see if it is sound. Okay, so allow me to begin by writing with the assertion that I'm extracting from your video. Now, hopefully this is an accurate duplicate. Let's call your assertion P, just for the sake of logic. Your assertion is that 300 milliseconds, or not your assertion, but the place where you got it from, the study. Okay, so 300 milliseconds before a thought is realized, a sub-thought is assumed. A subconscious thought is assumed. So 300 milliseconds before a thought is realized, a subconscious thought is assumed. Now, that's not explicitly what they said. Again, this is just, I think, a rough summary of what it was saying. Now, supposing that 300 milliseconds before a thought is realized, a subconscious thought is assumed. If a thought is not realized, then the control is gone from that agent. Think about that for a second. This premise. And by the way, this is where I'm sketching my argument right here. Okay. My first premise that I'm putting together with your assumption, P, is if a thought is not realized, like right now I'm thinking of my next words to explain this, whatever I'm presenting. The words that I had available, or I guess the mental construct that I have hindering in my mind, the subconscious, that is about to produce my next thoughts. The conscious thoughts, because they're realized, is the reason why I could choose how to control them. I have control of them because they're realized. So there's this contingent operation going on here. There's the thoughts depend on I mean, in order for the thoughts to be properly produced freely, one needs control of them, and the way you can get control is by its contingency, by realizing that thought. Okay, I think I'm getting a little faded, but let's try to stick with it. Hopefully that was clear. I just wanted to explain premise 1. Now, premise 2, if control is gone, one has no free will. Now, this just deals with how we're defining free will. Usually, free will is defined as the ability to choose otherwise, so it is usually all about control. If you could control your actions, you can choose to do otherwise, but if you have no control, then my premise stands. If your control is gone, then therefore you have no free will. Now, of course, this is the last assertion before the conclusion that there's no free will. The assumption, with assumption P, here comes the command, thoughts are not realized. So you have the if-thens, two if-thens, and the two premises that are if-thens, and then finally we get the direct assertion that's saying that, okay, well, here's the fact, given your assertion that the whole 300 millisecond thing. Given that assertion, I can say, as a fact for this premise, thoughts are not realized. Okay. And then the conclusion would then follow that there is no free will. Okay, now in this, let's see, what did I write here? Realization plays the determining factor in defining free will. The ability to realize what just happened. So realization is the ability to realize what just happened. And that plays a role, the major role, the determining factor in defining free will. Now, recollection, now I just wanted to lay that argument out, and I'm sure everybody's going to be anxious, or whoever is interested in this topic and is very vocal about it will be anxious to want to say something, agreeing, disagreeing, liking, finding something I messed up on, whatever. What was I going to say about this? Recollection is something I also want to go over. Now, I define recollection, as obviously I believe it should, as the ability to remember what you just realized. And realizing is, of course, realizing your conscious thoughts, not realizing the subconscious stuff that we're talking about here. So recollection is also important to make free will meaningful, the whole concept. If there was no recollection, and this I think is frankly intuitive, very obvious, but nonetheless I feel subtle things like this should be stated. Recollection is important also because if we were just to assume that realization, if we were only to put realization as the main factor in the working definition of free will, then I would be able to realize a thought, and that would be the controlled thought because it's realized, not the subconscious one. And that right there would be a frozen moment in time where I was able to choose, where I was able to have a decision. But if there was no recollection, it would be like we couldn't experience time, because to recollect is to remember what just happened. And so if time was going on, but you only realized every moment that you were in, how could you remember the former? Or, yeah, how could you remember the former of what you made up your mind here in this realized state? Okay, so that being said, that's sort of my idea about recollection. Very subtle, very obvious, but nonetheless, it should be defined into the definition. I mean, it should be considered with the definition of free will in order to make it, just to state it correctly, and because it's important to realize that as its utility. Okay, realizing content. Okay, so free will, I guess, could be summarized as realizing content to control it. And of course, not part of the definition, but something like its utility again, the ability to recollect. That's another factor that would make free will meaningful. Okay, so realizing content to control it. Not realizing content and control it, or control it or anything, but to control it. It's necessary in order to have this freedom of choice, this ability to choose, to control your decision of choosing otherwise. Realizing content to controlling it. I mean, realizing content to control it. If you can't realize it, you can't control it. It's that simple. And of course, it would have to be to an agent that could have some sort of capacity to conceive and abstract and conceptualize and whatnot. So when I say an agent, I usually mean that sort of abstraction of a person who has, or a thinking thing. Okay. I think I pretty much went over the implications of free will. Now, before I was even going to start this video, I had this really weird thought that just kind of sprang to mind. Let's say that determinism prevailed, and we aren't, or not even determinism, the whole view, but just this assertion that Kelly's putting forward from the person who got it from, the study. If every thought was preconceived, or no, not preconceived, but it was done without our ability to choose of it, so it just happens somehow randomly. It doesn't say anything about any external force of something controlling where it was coming from. We're not saying it was a direct act of causation, none of that. All I'm saying is that it's random, so for all we know, we're agnostic towards what happened to it. Okay, so there's probably only two possible options, but anyway, so we're not sure what happened, how this subconscious behavior originates in the subconscious, but nonetheless it does. Yes, and okay, so from here we get the content, and then it's controlled. Once it's produced, then it's controlled into the conscious realm of our minds, and then we're in the conscious realm. We're able to get the previous and control it, but this information that's coming in is sort of filtered. in that we didn't choose this before. We didn't control this into coming in its input